There was a time when the neighborhood of Willow Creek was little more than a collection of half-built homes and unpaved roads winding through low, grassy hills. Back then, the place had no fancy entrance sign, no manicured flower beds, and certainly no homeowner association dictating the color of everyone's mailboxes. It was just a quiet development in the making, one where a single wooden bridge connected the neighborhood to the rest of the world. That bridge wasn't much to look at. It was old, weathered, and creaked under the weight of passing cars. But it was reliable. It crossed a narrow stream that flooded every spring and turned the area into a temporary moat. Without it, the road ended abruptly in mud and reeds, cutting off access to the town beyond. The bridge was the only way in or out, and though nobody paid much attention to it, the bridge wasn't owned by the county or the city or even the developer. It was owned by a man named Henry Cole. Henry had lived on his property long before Willow Creek was ever drawn up in blueprints. His land stretched over 20 acres of rolling pasture, marked by an oak-lined driveway that crossed the same little stream. The bridge had been built decades ago by Henry's grandfather, back when the road was nothing but a dirt path leading to their farmhouse. When the developers came along and built the subdivision behind his land, they made a deal. They'd pave the road that ran across the bridge, as long as Henry allowed them to use it as the main access point. It was a handshake agreement, simple, unassuming, and written down only in an old easement tucked into Henry's property deed. For years, it worked perfectly. Residents came and went, waving politely as they crossed the bridge. Delivery trucks rumbled across its planks, kids rode their bikes over it, and life went on as if the bridge had always been part of the neighborhood. Henry maintained it quietly, fixing loose boards and keeping the weeds trimmed from the sides. Nobody ever questioned who it really belonged to. Then came the Homeowners Association. At first, the HOA's presence seemed harmless. A few letters in mailboxes about lawn maintenance, a sign at the entrance welcoming new residents, a few sternly worded notices about community standards. It was the kind of thing most neighborhoods grew into eventually, especially the ones trying to seem upscale. Henry didn't mind. His farmhouse stood just before the official entrance sign, technically outside the HOA's boundaries. The rules didn't apply to him, or so he thought. Over the years, the HOA board became more controlling. They planted ornamental trees by the road, built a little gatehouse that was never staffed, and put up decorative lighting along the entrance road, all of which sat on the strip of land Henry owned. Still, he said nothing. He didn't care much for the politics of suburban life. He was content to let them do as they pleased, as long as they didn't interfere with him. But interference has a way of creeping in quietly. The trouble began one spring morning, when Henry woke to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling near the creek. From his kitchen window, he saw a construction crew tearing down the wooden bridge. Piles of splintered boards lay in the mud, and an excavator was digging into the bank as if preparing to lay concrete. Confused, Henry threw on his boots and went to investigate. By the time he reached the edge of his property, the bridge was gone. In its place, workers were pouring the foundation for a new structure, a sleek concrete overpass designed to improve neighborhood accessibility, according to the laminated sign hammered into the ground. Henry scanned it, his name nowhere in sight. The project, it seemed, was fully funded and approved by the HOA. He couldn't believe it. No one had asked him. No one had even told him. For decades, that bridge had been his responsibility. His grandfather's work, his family's access road, his legal property. Now it was gone, demolished without a word. He found the HOA president later that day, standing near the construction site with a clipboard and an air of self-importance. She thanked him, quite casually, for allowing the work to proceed. Apparently, the HOA had decided the bridge was unsafe and needed replacement. They'd filed for a community improvement project, collected dues, and hired a contractor. In their eyes, It was an upgrade, a gift to everyone, including Henry. He tried to explain that the bridge wasn't theirs to touch, that the easement allowed passage, but not ownership. But the HOA president waved him off, saying something about public right-of-way and community access. She assured him everything was perfectly legal. It wasn't. A week later, Henry received a letter from the HOA's attorney, an official notice thanking him for his cooperation and confirming that the new bridge was now part of the neighborhood's common property. The arrogance of it was staggering. Not only had they torn down what was his, but they were claiming it outright. Still, Henry stayed calm. He had the original deed. He had the easement documents. He knew exactly where his property line ran. And though they didn't realize it, that line included not only the old bridge, but the entire stretch of road leading from the county highway to the neighborhood's entrance sign. The HOA's pristine asphalt road sat squarely on his land. For years, he had allowed its use without complaint. He saw no reason to charge for passage. But as he looked at the mess they'd made, the concrete curing in the sun, the signs announcing a grand reopening, something hardened in him. They hadn't asked permission. They hadn't respected him. They'd assumed ownership of something that wasn't theirs. And that was a mistake. When the new bridge finally opened, the residents celebrated with balloons and banners. The HOA sent out a cheerful email announcing improved access for all. Henry said nothing. He let them enjoy their moment. But in his quiet kitchen, he began to draft letters to the county surveyor, to a property rights attorney, to the title office. He gathered every document, every map, every photograph showing that the road and bridge sat entirely within his parcel of land. By the time the HOA sent its next newsletter, Henry was ready. Within a month, he had the legal paperwork to revoke public access to his private drive. The easement granted only permissive use, and that permission was now officially withdrawn. One crisp morning, Henry erected a gate across the entrance, an iron barrier just beyond the county line, right before the bridge. A small sign hung from it, simple and clear: private property. No trespassing. The next car to reach the bridge stopped abruptly. Then another, and another. Soon, a line of confused residents formed, their engines idling as they stared at the locked gate barring their only exit. For the first time, the people of Willow Creek realized that their perfect little neighborhood had only one road in or out, and it no longer belonged to them. And as the HOA president fumed and threatened and demanded explanations, Henry simply watched from his porch, calm and silent, knowing that the bridge they'd torn down had been the only thing keeping peace between them. Now, the real battle was about to begin. For the first 24 hours, the residents of Willow Creek believed the gate was a misunderstanding. They assumed Henry would come down, apologize, and open it once things were cleared up. Some even left polite notes, taped to the iron bars, asking him to call the HOA office. But as day turned into night, and the gate stayed locked, politeness gave way to frustration. The neighborhood was effectively sealed. The bridge, once a casual crossing, was now a barrier. The only other way out was a rough utility path through the backwoods, too narrow for cars and riddled with mud after the spring rains. Delivery trucks couldn't get through. School buses turned around at the gate and refused to enter. Mail stopped arriving altogether. For the first time, the residents realized how isolated their cul-de-sac paradise truly was. The HOA president, a woman named Denise Turner, called an emergency meeting in her driveway. Residents gathered with folding chairs, clutching coffee cups, and murmuring about property rights and lawsuits. Denise assured them that everything was under control, that she had already contacted the county, and that the landowner would be compelled to reopen access soon. But behind her confident tone, panic was setting in. The county's initial response had not been encouraging. The road, according to property records, was indeed on Henry's land. The easement, decades old, had been permissive, not public. The HOA had assumed, wrongly, that years of shared use granted them ownership or at least right-of-way. But property law doesn't reward assumptions. Once Henry revoked permission, access was legally blocked. It wasn't a criminal act. It was his right. When county officials arrived the next morning, they couldn't order Henry to remove the gate. They could only ask if he might consider opening it temporarily for the good of the community. Henry listened, nodding politely from behind the fence, and said he would take it under advisement. He didn't. The gate stayed closed. Inside Willow Creek, tempers flared. Denise sent increasingly stern letters to Henry, accusing him of obstruction, harassment, and intentional disruption of community order. None were answered. She tried to involve the local sheriff, but the deputies could do little more than confirm that the property was private and the gate lawful. Every official avenue ended in the same dead end. Henry owned the road. The HOA had no claim. Within days, the inconvenience grew into chaos. Residents missed work. Packages piled up at the county road entrance. One man tried to drive his SUV through the shallow end of the creek to bypass the bridge entirely. He got stuck in the mud. His engine flooded. Children couldn't catch the school bus. Trash trucks refused to enter, leaving bins overflowing in the early summer heat. And through it all, Henry watched, not with smugness, but with a kind of quiet satisfaction. He hadn't wanted this outcome, but he also hadn't invited the trouble. They'd forced his hand when they demolished his bridge without consent. He'd spent weeks trying to reason with them. Now, they could live with the consequences of ignoring him. Denise, however, was not the type to back down. She began a campaign to discredit Henry within the community. Flyers appeared in mailboxes claiming he was extorting residents and threatening public safety. Social media pages filled with angry posts calling him a selfish old man. And the reason our kids can't get to school. One resident even suggested organizing a group to cut the lock and take back the road. That last idea nearly became reality one night. Around midnight, Henry was awakened by the metallic clang of tools against the gate. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto his porch, catching sight of two men, residents by their vehicles, trying to saw through the chain. He didn't shout. He simply took out his phone and began recording. When the men noticed, they cursed, dropped their tools, and drove off. By morning, Henry had already sent the footage to his attorney. That's when the tone of the battle changed. Henry's lawyer drafted a formal notice of trespass and property destruction, addressed directly to the HOA. Attached was an invoice for damages, including legal fees and the cost of replacing the chain. It wasn't a large amount, just a few $100s, but the message was clear. Every action they took against him would carry a price. Every intrusion would be documented. Denise called an emergency board meeting, this time inside her home. Behind closed doors, the HOA discussed their options. They could take Henry to court and seek an injunction forcing him to reopen the road, but that would require proving an established public easement, something they didn't have. Their attorney's opinion was grim. Unless they could find a technicality in the original land agreement, Henry's ownership was absolute. Any lawsuit would likely fail, and even if it succeeded, it could take years. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to deteriorate. Residents had to park their cars outside the gate and walk home through the mud. Grocery bags were hauled by hand. Amazon drivers refused deliveries altogether. The situation was unsustainable. Rumors spread that some homeowners were considering selling, though how they planned to show their houses to buyers without access was anyone's guess. Henry, for his part, remained quiet. He spent his days repairing fences, mowing the pasture, and tending his small garden. But he also began a subtle transformation of his property. Gravel trucks came and went, dumping load after load along the private road leading to his farmhouse, widening it, strengthening it. making it more distinctly separate from the paved neighborhood lane beyond the gate. He was preparing for something larger, something that would finalize the separation between his land and theirs. Then came the letter from Denise, thick, embossed, and delivered by courier. Inside was an offer. The HOA proposed to purchase the road and the land beneath it, including the bridge, for what they called a fair market value. The figure was laughable, barely enough to cover the cost of his recent maintenance work. But Henry didn't laugh. He read every line carefully, noting the arrogance dripping from each word. They weren't asking permission. They were trying to buy absolution. He declined, of course, but he didn't just say no. His response was brief and final. Access denied. Offer rejected. Continued trespass will result in escalation. When the HOA lawyer replied, hinting at litigation, Henry's attorney filed a counterclaim, not just for trespass, but for damages to the demolished bridge, unauthorized construction on private property, and theft of land improvements. The total sum, over $200,000. Suddenly, the board meetings grew silent. Denise's confident tone vanished. The HOA had walked headfirst into a legal minefield. News spread fast. Local reporters picked up the story. Neighborhood cut off after HOA destroys man's bridge. The headline alone was enough to draw attention. Cameras arrived, filming the locked gate and interviewing stranded residents. Public opinion turned sharply against the HOA once the details emerged. The comments online were merciless. People called it poetic justice. Some even praised Henry as a legend for standing up to entitled neighbors. For the first time, Denise looked cornered. The pressure from residents was unbearable. They wanted the road reopened, but every legal attempt had failed. And now, the HOA's reputation was ruined. She needed a way out. A quick solution before the lawsuits crushed them. That's when she made her biggest mistake yet. Without consulting the board, Denise authorized the contractor to build a new access road through the backwoods, a path that would cut around Henry's land entirely. It was a bold plan, maybe even a desperate one, but it would require heavy clearing equipment and county approval, neither of which she had. And when the bulldozers arrived one foggy morning, rumbling through the trees and tearing up the soil just beyond Henry's fence, it took him less than an hour to realize what she was doing. He didn't call her. He didn't warn her. He simply opened his phone, called his attorney, and filed a formal complaint with the county's land enforcement office. This time, the HOA wasn't just overstepping a boundary. They were breaking the law, and Henry knew exactly how to make them regret it. The sound of chainsaws carried across the morning fog, steady and rhythmic, like a warning drumbeat echoing through the trees. From his porch, Henry watched as the heavy machinery crept along the edge of his property. The equipment was enormous. Yellow bulldozers and excavators cutting through the undergrowth, flattening young pines and scraping deep scars into the damp soil. At first glance, it looked like progress, but Henry knew better. He recognized the land. The machines weren't just clearing brush. They were carving a new road, a road that cut directly across a portion of his boundary, land the HOA didn't own. He'd half expected them to do something reckless. They'd exhausted every legal argument, lost the support of the county, and were bleeding money from failed legal motions. Yet instead of accepting defeat, the HOA had doubled down. They were building their own emergency access road, as Denise called it. Only it wasn't theirs to build. By noon, the construction crew had driven steel markers deep into the ground, survey stakes, red and white, slicing through Henry's field like scars. One of them stood barely 10 feet from his fence line, and another directly in the middle of his drainage ditch. It was clear they hadn't checked the actual boundary, or maybe they just didn't care. Henry made no scene. He didn't storm down the hill or yell at the workers. He simply took out his camera, photographed every marker, every machine, every operator. He captured the license plates of the trucks, the company name printed on their doors, and the line where his property posts stood in plain view. Then he went inside and made 2 calls, one to his attorney and one to the county land office. By the next morning, the site was crawling with inspectors. Bright orange vests, clipboards, GPS scanners. The HOA board watched nervously from the neighborhood side of the woods, whispering among themselves. When the inspectors walked the perimeter, the truth came out quickly. The entire first 100 feet of their new road sat directly on Henry's private land. Not just the edge, squarely across it. And since no permits had been filed for development, the work was officially illegal. The county ordered an immediate stop to construction. The machines went silent. The workers packed up and left. The red survey flags fluttered in the wind, abandoned like evidence of a crime. That afternoon, the county delivered its findings in writing to the HOA office. Unpermitted construction, boundary encroachment, and environmental disturbance. Penalties would follow. Henry didn't have to lift a finger. They'd done all the damage themselves. Still, the HOA didn't apologize. Denise, stubborn and furious, blamed the contractor. The contractor blamed the HOA's incomplete maps. No one admitted fault. But Henry's attorney was already 2 steps ahead. Within days, a lawsuit was filed in county court. Cole v. Willow Creek Homeowners Association. The complaint was straightforward: trespass, destruction of private property, and illegal land development. But the evidence was devastating. Drone photos, survey maps, county violation reports, even timestamps showing the HOA's own equipment crossing Henry's fence line. The amount claimed in damages was staggering: $250,000 in restitution, plus legal fees and costs for restoration of the property. For a suburban HOA, it might as well have been a death sentence. When the lawsuit papers were served, the neighborhood fell into stunned silence. Residents woke to find official notices taped to their mailboxes, legal documents referencing the association's name. Panic spread like wildfire. Homeowners demanded answers. Board members resigned quietly, one after another. Within a week, Denise was the last one standing. The pressure mounted quickly. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Intentional property damage wasn't part of their policy. The HOA's reserve fund, once used for landscaping and social events, was drained by attorney retainers. Special assessments were proposed, meaning every homeowner would have to pay thousands to cover the legal fallout. That's when the rebellion began. Residents turned against the very board that had claimed to protect them. Meetings turned into shouting matches. People who'd once rallied behind Denise now called her reckless, even dangerous. All because you wanted a prettier bridge, one man said during a meeting so heated that police had to be called to keep order. Denise tried to save face, claiming she was defending the community's access rights. But no one was listening. The lawsuit had exposed the truth. The HOA had built illegally, trespassed knowingly, and destroyed private property belonging to a man who'd never once broken a rule. And while they scrambled to contain the damage, Henry moved forward methodically, quietly, deliberately. He hired contractors, not to rebuild the bridge, but to improve the gate. The old iron bars were replaced with a full steel gatehouse, complete with motion sensors and automatic locks. He installed cameras, lights, and a private gravel turnaround on his side. The once open road now looked like the entrance to a private estate. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Within the community, daily life had collapsed into inconvenience and resentment. Residents carpooled through the back trails or parked miles away just to get to work. The HOA's funds dwindled. Notices went unpaid. Vendors stopped servicing the area entirely. Willow Creek, once advertised as an exclusive retreat, had become a trapped enclave, cut off and spiraling into disrepair. Meanwhile, Henry's case gained traction in court. Local media picked it up again. Man sues HOA that tore down his bridge, wins county support. The coverage was relentless. Reporters loved the narrative. One man defending his rights against an overreaching homeowners association. Viewers flooded the comment sections with words like justice, karma, and don't mess with property owners. When the first court hearing arrived, Denise appeared in a tailored suit and a forced smile. Henry showed up in his work boots and flannel, accompanied by his attorney. The judge, a stern man with little patience for arrogance, reviewed the evidence. It didn't take long. The photos spoke for themselves. The easement documents were clear. The HOA's permit violations were undeniable. In a tone that carried across the entire courtroom, the judge ruled in Henry's favor on the trespass and property destruction claims. Damages would be determined later, but the liability was settled. The HOA was guilty. The fallout was immediate. Denise's resignation came the next day, submitted in writing but announced publicly during a chaotic meeting that erupted into shouting. She blamed the board. The board blamed her. The residents blamed everyone. By the time the dust settled, Willow Creek's HOA was effectively leaderless, drowning in debt, and facing a massive payout to Henry Cole. Yet for Henry, it wasn't about the money. It was about principle, about respect, about the quiet arrogance of people who believed their rules outweighed ownership. The court victory was vindication, but not closure. Because even after the ruling, the neighborhood still needed access. The bridge was gone. The road was locked. They were stranded. And though he had the right to keep it that way, Henry wasn't cruel. He began to consider what would come next. Not for revenge, but for resolution. But before he could decide, something unexpected happened. A new developer appeared, an opportunist who saw value where others saw disaster. He offered to buy part of the land adjoining Willow Creek, including the section near the destroyed bridge. His plan was to build a new access road, legally this time, connecting the neighborhood to the highway through his own property. Henry was intrigued but cautious. The man's offer wasn't just a purchase. It was a proposal to permanently separate Willow Creek's access from his land, ending the dispute forever. Yet even as he weighed the offer, Henry received an envelope on his porch, unmarked, slipped under the gate late at night. Inside was a single piece of paper, a handwritten note that said, "We're not done." It wasn't signed. But Henry didn't need a name. He knew exactly who it was from, and the fight, he realized, wasn't quite over yet. The letter sat on Henry's kitchen table for days, its folded edges softening beneath the weight of his coffee mug. He'd read it only once, but that single sentence, "We're not done," echoed in his mind with every quiet hour that passed. It wasn't a threat, not directly. It was a promise, a whisper that the chaos in Willow Creek had not yet run its course. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but the note carried the scent of desperation, and desperation was dangerous. He'd seen it before. People cornered, pride wounded, looking for someone else to blame. The HOA had lost the court battle. Its president had resigned in disgrace, and its finances were in ruins. Yet there were still those within the community who refused to accept that they'd been wrong. They wanted revenge, not resolution. It started small. One morning, Henry noticed tire tracks pressed deep into the soft soil along his fence line. Not the straight, deliberate tracks of construction trucks, but erratic ones, as if someone had driven close on purpose, swerving wildly before turning back. Then came the missing mailbox, yanked from its post overnight. Then the scratches, deep gouges carved into the paint of his gate with something sharp. None of it surprised him. The residents were angry, trapped, and humiliated. Someone, or several someones, had decided that venting their rage on him was easier than facing the truth of their own mistakes. Henry did what he always did, documented everything. Photos, videos, dates, and times. He reported it quietly to the sheriff's office, who promised to keep an eye out, though he knew they could do little without witnesses. Still, he stayed calm. He'd endured worse storms in his life than the tantrums of entitled neighbors, but the situation escalated. One evening, just after sunset, he noticed flickering light through the trees near the old bridge site. At first, he thought it was a flashlight. Then he saw the orange glow of flame. Someone had set fire to a pile of lumber stacked by the creek, remnants from the old bridge still waiting to be hauled away. The blaze spread quickly, sparks leaping across dry grass, smoke rolling into the twilight. Henry grabbed his hose, calling the fire department as he worked to contain it. Thankfully, the flames were doused before they could spread far. The firefighters determined it was arson. Accelerant poured over the wood, ignited deliberately. That night, Henry installed motion lights along every corner of his property. The quiet farm had turned into a fortress. The sheriff's deputies began patrolling more frequently, parking near the gate and watching the road. No arrests were made, but the attention alone made the neighborhood nervous. For the first time, the residents realized how far things had spiraled. The image of their once idyllic community had burned away, literally. Meanwhile, word of the fire spread beyond Willow Creek. The local news returned, cameras capturing the scorched grass and charred boards. The headline read, "Bridge Battle Escalates. Fire at Property of Man Suing HOA." Commenters online were ruthless. Public sympathy leaned harder toward Henry, painting him as a victim of harassment and the HOA as a nest of bullies. The remaining board members went silent. Meetings were canceled. Notices went unanswered. Even Denise, who had resigned months earlier, avoided interviews. She'd vanished from the public eye, retreating into her house while the neighborhood's reputation crumbled. But Henry knew silence rarely meant surrender. One morning, his attorney arrived unannounced, holding a thick envelope of papers. The HOA's insurance company had finally made contact, desperate to settle before the court determined damages. The number they offered was large, astonishingly large, enough to repair his property, rebuild the bridge if he ever wanted to, and then some. Henry read the offer carefully. Buried in the fine print was the condition that he must grant perpetual access and withdraw the barrier obstructing the main road. They wanted the gate gone. They wanted the road back. He laughed, not cruelly, but with disbelief. After all this, the trespassing, the fire, the lawsuits, they still thought money could erase it. He refused the settlement. His attorney delivered the message in writing, short and firm. Henry didn't want their money. He wanted separation. The HOA could find its own road, build its own bridge, live with its own mistakes. That decision broke the last thread of civility. The harassment intensified. Drone footage began appearing online. Grainy videos of Henry's land taken from above, uploaded anonymously to local forums. The captions accused him of hoarding community property and profiting off public infrastructure. It was all false, of course, but the intention was clear: discredit him again. In the court of public opinion, what they didn't realize was that Henry had already traced the drone operator. The registration number, captured in one of his recordings, led directly to a Willow Creek resident, one of the loudest voices at HOA meetings. His attorney added it to the lawsuit as a new count: invasion of privacy. By the end of summer, the HOA's legal debts had surpassed its total assets. Property values in Willow Creek plummeted. Homes that once sold above market now sat unsold for months, their driveways cracked, their lawns overgrown. The developer who'd approached Henry earlier returned, this time making a new offer, not to buy the road, but to buy several foreclosed properties in the neighborhood itself. Henry accepted his visit this time, meeting him at the gate. The developer proposed a plan: dissolve the HOA entirely, allow him to purchase the remaining lots, and connect the neighborhood to his adjoining parcel with a legitimate county-approved access road. It would mean independence for Willow Creek and permanent peace for Henry. He agreed to the idea on one condition: his property line including the bridge site, would remain untouched, protected by new fencing and a written agreement guaranteeing no future easements. The developer agreed, and just like that, the tide turned. Construction began that autumn. The new road, cut through the developer's land, gave residents a second exit for the first time in the neighborhood's history. Trucks rumbled day and night, hauling gravel, pouring asphalt, erecting a bright new Willow Creek entrance sign, far from Henry's property. The residents, exhausted and ashamed, began to move on. Some left entirely, selling their homes to buyers who didn't care about old neighborhood politics. Others stayed, grateful for the escape from years of HOA tyranny. The board quietly dissolved, unable to afford its own existence. By the time the new road opened, Henry's Gate was rarely discussed anymore. It remained locked, but peaceful. Weeds grew around the hinges, and birds perched on its bars in the evenings. For the first time in years, the road was silent, not from conflict, but from closure. Henry could finally breathe. One crisp October morning, he walked down to the creek. The ashes from the fire had long washed away. The air was cool and still. He stood on the bank where his grandfather's bridge had once stood, and realized that, in its absence, something stronger had been built. Not wood, not concrete, but boundaries. He looked back toward his house, the autumn light catching on the silver of the new fence line. For the first time, Willow Creek existed entirely without him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He turned to leave, unaware that behind him, at the far edge of the property, a figure watched from the shadows, the faint silhouette of a woman clutching a folder, her expression unreadable. Denise Turner had returned. Autumn had come early that year. The air was sharper, the mornings cloaked in mist that hung low over the creek like smoke that refused to lift. Henry liked it that way. The silence felt earned now, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath after years of shouting. The new road had opened 2 weeks earlier, a smooth ribbon of asphalt curling through the developer's land to meet the county highway. It gleamed under the soft light, clean and new, untainted by conflict. Residents of Willow Creek used it daily now, driving past their new sign with quiet relief. For the first time in years, they didn't have to glance toward Henry's Gate when they came or went. The feud that had consumed them was fading into memory, but not everyone was ready to let go. Denise Turner returned without announcement. She no longer carried herself like the proud HOA president she once was. The tailored blazers and polished hair had been replaced by something harder, thinner. Her eyes had the restless gleam of someone who had lost too much and blamed everyone but herself. Henry saw her first from the kitchen window, standing near the far fence line just beyond the creek, holding a folder in her arms. She wasn't trespassing. She stood technically outside his property, but she was close enough to make her presence known. He didn't go out to meet her. He didn't wave. He simply watched until she turned and disappeared into the fog. The next morning, he found an envelope at his gate. No threats this time. No handwritten notes. Just a stack of papers clipped together neatly. A letter, formal and legal-looking, typed on the letterhead of a small, local law firm. Denise was suing him. Not for money. She didn't have the means anymore, but for defamation and emotional distress. The claim accused Henry of waging a public smear campaign against her and the HOA, alleging that his lawsuit and the resulting media coverage had irreparably damaged her reputation. It was a desperate move, one destined to fail, but it confirmed what Henry already knew. Some people would rather destroy themselves than admit defeat. His attorney filed a response within days. The counterclaim was concise and merciless, citing documented harassment, false statements, and the arson investigation that remained open. When the new judge saw the filings, the defamation case was dismissed almost immediately. Denise was ordered to pay court costs. She didn't. The matter should have ended there. But Denise didn't disappear this time. She lingered in the area, seen occasionally at the old HOA office, or parked at the end of the cul-de-sac late at night. Rumors spread that she was trying to rally former residents, urging them to restore the community's dignity. Most ignored her. Some pitied her. A few were afraid of her. Henry tried to ignore it too. He focused on his land. He repaired fences before winter, cleared fallen branches from the creek, and reseeded the fields where the bulldozers had once carved ruts. The land was healing, and so was he. But trouble has a way of circling back just when things start to feel safe again. It happened in early November. The first frost had painted the grass silver, and Henry was stacking firewood when he noticed the drone again. Low, humming, drifting across the creek like a mechanical wasp. It hovered above the gate, turned toward his barn, then swung over the field before retreating toward Willow Creek. He recognized the sound instantly. It wasn't one of the earlier models used by the HOA residents. It was newer, quieter, and better equipped. He didn't need proof to know who was behind it. He simply went inside and pulled out the same camera he'd used since the start of all this, filming the drone until it disappeared into the fog. Then he called the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, Denise was gone, but her car, an old silver sedan, had been spotted near the new road construction site. A search of her vehicle turned up nothing incriminating, just maps of the area and a worn leather folder filled with old HOA documents. They let her go with a warning, but she'd made her point. She wanted Henry to know she was still watching. That night, he sat on his porch for hours, the gate lights casting long shadows across the gravel. The air was cold, the sky starless. He thought of all that had happened, the bridge, the lawsuits, the flames, the endless arguments over who owned what. It was absurd, really, how a single misunderstanding of property lines had spiraled into years of bitterness. He wondered if Denise understood that she hadn't lost to him, but to herself. The bridge hadn't destroyed her reputation. Her pride had. 2 days later, she came again. This time, she didn't bring a folder. She brought a letter. Henry found it nailed to the wooden post beside the gate. The paper was folded and soaked through from the morning dew, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges. It wasn't a legal threat. It was an apology, a strange, rambling one, half regret, half justification. She wrote of her intentions, how she had wanted to make the neighborhood beautiful, unified, respected. How she hadn't realized the bridge was his, that she'd trusted bad advice. She wrote that she'd lost her home, her marriage, her savings. She said the lawsuit had taken everything, but that she was finally ready to let it go. To last line was the only one that felt sincere. You were right to protect what's yours. Henry stood there a long time, the morning sun rising behind him, glinting off the iron bars of the gate. He folded the letter carefully, placed it inside his jacket, and walked back to the house. That was the last he ever heard of her. In the months that followed, Willow Creek slowly found its rhythm again. Without an HOA, the neighborhood took on a more relaxed charm. Messier lawns, mismatched mailboxes, but fewer arguments. People waved at one another again. Children played near the new bridge, laughing as if the land had forgotten the feud entirely. Henry rarely crossed into town now. He didn't need to. The solitude suited him. Every now and then, a new resident would stop by the gate, curious about the stories they'd heard. He'd smile, shake his head, and tell them there wasn't much to say, that it had all been a misunderstanding that got out of hand. But when he walked the property at dusk, he'd glance toward the creek and remember the sound of hammers on wood. The first bridge his grandfather built, the symbol of connection it once was. He sometimes thought about rebuilding it, not for the neighborhood, but for himself. Something smaller, simpler, a way to cross over, if only to honor the past. Winter came quietly that year. Snow blanketed the fields, softening the scars left by years of conflict. The gate stood silent beneath a thin coat of frost, no longer a symbol of defiance, but of peace hard-earned. And in that stillness, Henry finally understood what his grandfather must have known when he built the first bridge. That ownership isn't just about land or documents or deeds, it's about stewardship, responsibility, respect for boundaries, both physical and human. They had torn down his bridge, thinking it was theirs, but in doing so, they'd built him something far stronger: freedom.